Hi, I'm Jeremy.pauhl, broker at RE/MAX Escarpment, Golfi Realty Inc. Brokerage. Thank you once again for joining me on part 2 of the series for multi-residential properties and some of the challenges investors face along the way. Today, we're going to be focusing on some different issues than the first topic. Really and specifically, we're going to be looking at breaking down the building today. So, location considerations, transit, walkability, basic services. Most of the times people are looking for that. They're aware of these things, especially trending communities. But when it comes to crime rates too, I think that's an area where sometimes that gets overlooked by investors. A lot of my conversations with investor clients is about the community, or if it's in a residential or in a high mix of rental properties, and then in that case, how much is the rental income? Is it in a trend growing up, or is it staying kind of flat in the last few years, kind of thing? So those are what people focus on. But when it comes to people actually renting properties and how much they're willing to spend on the rent, that's very important. Obviously, it almost goes hand in hand with the specific location. You kind of get an idea what's a good and bad community, but it's really helpful if you're going to spend millions of dollars potentially. I would definitely do a detailed report about the crime rate, how often, the frequency, because you don't want any issues with your building or any of your tenants inside it causing any troubles for you or any of your other clients. So really important to think about. Next thing we're going to look at is a kind of building, purpose-built. So if you're not aware of these terms, a purpose-built building for multi-residential purposes is one that is specifically meant for housing separate residential units right from the start, versus the converted where you're taking a school or an office building or a larger property and putting on an addition to it. So those converted properties typically have to be rezoned, and it's a complicated process, and there's never any guarantees when you go to buy a property up front. Usually you have to go through the committee of adjustments process. So even though there's potential always, never a guarantee. So investors are always taking a risk to a certain degree unless it's already been pre-approved and you have signed documents from the city saying that can now be used for legal conforming multi-residential property, whether it's 2, 3, or 4+ units. But when you get to 5+, that's where you really probably want to stick with a purpose-built. It'll be a lot easier path, and the path will be of the least resistance for you anyways. And it can usually command a higher rate of income as well. Next, I want to look at the construction type. If you're not aware, this is really important as an investor, as a landlord, and as a business owner of the kind of property that you're buying and the quality that you're buying. So just to briefly recap, wood frames, the good of them is less costly, better at retaining heat, and quicker to construct, but they are prone to shrinkage, buckling, leaks, and limited to 6 stories, and they can be noisy over time with people walking on them. Steel frame, it's good, but it's not susceptible to mold or cracks, but it's higher material costs, and there's other building components that may develop mold or cracks because it can't take care of everything. The reinforced concrete frame, fire resistant, flexible design, and cost effective, so that's really good, and it helps with noise, but it lacks durability because of potential for cracks and drying out over time. And then the load-bearing masonry, it's very durable, but it's subject to height restrictions, it's poorly insulated, and usually requires extensive modernization. So when you're buying a property, very important to look at the material that is being used to build it. Same when we look at insulation now. These are the 4 types of insulation that we see out there. Fiberglass, least costly, least efficient. Rock wool, higher thermal resistance and greater cost. Form board, thinner layer and difficult to cut and fit. And then the spray foam insulation, which is most costly but the greater efficiency. So if you're unaware, those are your 4 options. Do some research depending on the size of your property, how old the building is. All of these things are going to matter, and how much it will affect you being able to increase the rent when you do renovations to add these new features to the property. The building systems. So again, you got to take your time when you're an investor and go through everything step by step, the interior fire code, maintain or disconnect that chimney, have proper amount of fire exits, fire alarms, fire extinguishers, and a whole bunch of other things. So that's just a recap to get you thinking about that. Very important to do your research for the entire code to make sure everything's in order. HVAC system, of course, it's super important. Everybody knows about that, but a lot of investors aren't aware that sometimes the city sets limits. So the minimum temperature could be set at 21 degrees, for example. So if things aren't working great or that efficient in your unit, if a tenant does complain because it's too cold and not meeting those thresholds, you could get a fine and be forced to address that sooner than you anticipated. So something to be aware of and plan from right from the start. Electrical, same thing, got to make sure it meets the code. Give information to the tenants about who provides the electricity and the policies there about how to use it or what not to touch to make sure your insurance stays valid at all times. Plumbing, properties, super important between 95 to 2007. Could have forms of Kitech plumbing, and there's many different forms of that, dozens and dozens. So that's something that during a home inspection, you want to absolutely have the inspector highlight that and look very carefully for those products. It's not the end of the world if we do come across it. They can be replaced. And again, that can either be negotiated to having the seller do it before you take possession, or we negotiate to have a lower price, get the money back, which I've done before, and then have the new buyer put it towards fixing and removing the Kitech to their standards, because it takes removing the drywall and replacing that and repainting again. So it's a very large process, but one, again, that can be addressed, especially if you're going to renovate anyways and increase the rent per room on the door price. Environmental considerations. Water obviously must be consumable. If pushed, you have to pass a water quality test if your tenants are questioning that or don't think it's right. So you have to make sure that that's all addressed. And if you do have any concerns right away, it's really easy when you go in for an inspection or a tour of the property. Just turn on the tap. We get a little sample size. There's many places around that will do the water sample test for you. In a few days or a week, you get the results back. So before you purchase, you can have reassurance about that as well. Same thing with the soil, of course, and the air quality is not compromised. Researching the property now. Strengths and weaknesses. Again, it depends. I mean, there's a long list of things you can look at or you could skip over. Recently, I found in this competitive seller's market that investors, they were having their back against the wall and forced to buy properties potentially without an inspection and over asking price and competition. So the due diligence was getting skipped in a lot of cases, and then even a small percentage, but a percentage anyways, had properties not close at closing when they're supposed to. So the buyers lost the down payment because the banks wouldn't let them use it for the purposes, whether they didn't have enough in down payment, the interest rates qualification rules changed, the job situations changed, or any number of reasons that it allowed them to not qualify to close the property. So very important you have that all taken care of in advance, all of the strengths and weaknesses. So what maintenance would be required, have the tenants complain about the property. Why not do a survey, ask if it's okay, send a questionnaire to the listing realtor. We could see if they wouldn't mind having the landlord send it out in an email to his tenants and just have a quick response. Maybe we get some answers that way, or maybe we can just pull people aside as you see them outside and just, in a not so much of a formal manner, just ask them how things have been. Are there issues with the property? That's extremely important, and that's usually where you're going to get the most valuable information, is from people who've been living there for a while, of course. Then more detailed, are there outstanding work orders for the property? A lot of people just skip over that process, especially if we're talking the 5+ commercial units. And then, will any easements cause issues for people? So some kind of next level questions in your analysis when you're talking about the property. This one, critically important. Again, the bigger the property, the more units, the more serious you have to look at all the components that could cause potential issues for you in the future. And by issues, I really mean more money that you were not expecting to spend. So if you purchase a commercial property, you should consider getting this property condition assessment done. There is a set of standards, and you're going to have a lot of things reviewed that you can see there. And You can do all the comparisons and market review and have inspectors come in, but there's certain level professionals that you absolutely want to pay for and bring on before you spend millions of dollars on these big investments. Common amenities, there could be a lot of them depending on what the property is that you're looking at buying. So you could have paid or include parking, maybe even a dog park now, swimming pools, paid laundry services, lobbies, bicycle storage, party room, fitness room, concierge service, and playgrounds for the kids. So a lot of different things to either maintain or think about for liability issues, insurance issues. All of that's going to add up, and so you're going to want to think about that in advance, is how much you're going to want to take on with your investment. If you're a seasoned investor, you can go all in and go for large properties that offer all these features. Or if you're just starting out, I would recommend starting with some smaller investment properties, get used to becoming a landlord, dealing with the kinds of issues and frequency of calls that you might get experience with the maintenance issues and how often that tends to come up. And then that way you can move on to many more units where you feel comfortable that you have the right reserve. Because if you don't have the right reserve funds right off the bat, you're going to be digging yourself in a hole and you're never going to hit your profit numbers that you want in the end. Interpreting the mix now, of course, this is super important for investors. And this is why you want to make sure you have a great realtor or real estate broker who knows their information, does the research. This is why I put so much effort into creating these videos again, because I really do want to excel for my clients. And it's information like this that matters. So when you're doing your assessment, studios and one bedrooms, they have high turnover rates, more tenants paying for market rent though. Because of the higher turnover, you can command a consistent market value. You will have greater vacancies in general, and it's more effort required to finding tenants, of course, because of the turnover. 2 and 3 bedrooms, lower turnover rates. People tend to stand longer because they're usually more families in that case. Less tenants paying market rents though, because they're there long term. So in that case, the landlord may not realize the full income potential. So it depends. 2 and 3 bedrooms, if you get the right cap rate off the bat and your finances are looking good, if you're a long-term investor and you don't want to deal with all the other issues that could come with high turnover rates and putting out money to try to keep the units modernized to attract new clients at the highest possible market rates, then that's the safest route to go. But if you're looking for max potential return on your investment and always renovating your units and keeping them in top shape and always getting the highest market value possible, so at any point when you hit your numbers that you can turn it for a profit and list it for sale and you're ready to go, then look for places that have more studio and 1 bedroom apartments. Or of course, if you want in between, you get a mix of both. But it's really good to know kind of the mentality that tenants have when they buy those properties. Landlord rights, this is critically important for you. What happens if you have unpaid rent, noise disturbances, drug use problems, and below market rent with existing incentives that you can give tenants to try to get them out early. These are some of the things that I'd want to go over. Give me a call. We can talk about them specific to a property or a certain case, and then that way we can go over a more personalized to your situation, or generalized if you want, but please just give me a call or send me an email if you have different questions about that. One thing I just want to highlight, just go over a couple of things. So if you purchase a low-rise apartment building, for example, one of the tenants has a history of unpaid rent, what can you do? So as the new owner, you can submit a notice of termination tenancy at the term end, and then that's on form N8. It's hard to see there in the file. And then you can apply to the landlord tenant board to evict the tenant to get rid of them. There's no easy solution. There's no way to easily recover that money if there's months lost, but at least you can eventually get them out and then start to maximize with current market value. In a different situation, if a tenant is smoking in a unit and there's nothing in the current lease to prohibit it, then you could seek eviction if the smoking is causing damage to the unit. And there's a lot of ways that you could justify showing that it's causing damage to the unit with staining and smelling issues and different things like that. And you have the right to go in with proper notice to inspect it. And if things aren't up to proper standards as when they took possession, then that's when you can take proper steps. And it's justifiable too. And it's not being a tough landlord or being too hard on these tenants. If that's causing real damage and reducing the value of your unit, then you absolutely should protect your investment. So in the case moving forward, then make sure that you write it into the new clauses, because, for example, you have to honor the different lease agreements. So if there's 10 different units in your building, you can't just create a new unit-wide policy that all of a sudden saying September 1st, 2022, we're going to start a no rules of no smoking for the entire building. It's not allowed. Every single contract is individualized, so it has to be part of every contract. If you want, if it's not in there already, you need to put it in. So a little more on the evictions and any tenancy. So you can proceed with these proper paperwork if the tenant hasn't been paying rent, if they're subletting the unit without consent, if they're causing damage to the unit in any manner, if they're disturbing other tenants around you, and that can come in any number of forms, conducting illegal activities in the unit, and vacating. They have to do that if the landlord wants to come in and live there themselves directly. And the tenants may only end the lease agreement early if they've negotiated a solution with the landlord in advance in a signed legal document. They can't bail on you. So just a little bit of information there. There's a lot more to come, and the next episode in part 3, I'll be diving into the numbers, and that's probably the most important and the most complicated for investors, and I think it'll be a super helpful topic to go over. So thank you once again for reviewing this. This was a really long video now at 17 minutes, but hopefully you find it valuable, and I appreciate your time. Thank you so much, and I hope to see you in part 3. Take care. Have a great day.